I had always prided myself on being a good neighbor, a supportive friend, and above all, a devoted wife and mother. My family, my small, precious world was built on a foundation of love, sacrifice, and an almost relentless dedication to ensuring everyone else's comfort and happiness. I cooked, I cleaned, I organized. I served often with a quiet smile while everyone else around me relaxed, taking my efforts, my very presence as a given, like the steady, unassuming hum of a well-oiled machine that keeps everything running smoothly in the background. My husband, Jason, a man I loved deeply despite his growing obliviousness, would occasionally offer a perfunctory, "Thanks, Han dinner was great," but his family, especially his formidable mother Brenda and his two self-absorbed sisters Chloe and Olivia, treated me less like a cherished family member and more as if I were an invisible, albeit highly efficient domestic servant. Their expectations were unspoken yet absolute. When a special family holiday, the sprawling, chaotic, and utterly exhausting Thanksgiving feast, came around yet again, I was as always expected to orchestrate and execute the entire Herculean burden of preparation, from the meticulous menu planning weeks in advance to the final weary dish wiped clean late into the night. But this time, as I stood amidst the culinary carnage of yet another holiday, single-handedly produced something within me, something that had been slowly, painfully fraying for years, finally irrevocably snapped. I decided with a clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating that it was time to stop being their unthanked, unseen, and utterly exhausted servant. On that fateful Thanksgiving day, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cause a scene, but I made a silent, steely vow. And for the next family gathering, the upcoming Christmas celebration, I turned the tables. What happened next shocked everyone, including to some extent myself. My name is Eleanor Vance, though most everyone calls me Ellie. When Jason and I first married nearly 2 decades ago now, our life together seemed like a beautifully scripted romantic comedy. We were young, brimming with ambition. He for his burgeoning career in finance, I for my then promising path as an interior designer, and so deeply incandescently in love that the world seemed to shimmer with possibility. We bought a charming, slightly run-down Victorian fixer-upper on a quiet, tree-lined street and poured our weekends, our laughter, and our shared dreams into transforming it into a beautiful, welcoming home. We dreamed of filling it with children with joy, with the comfortable, contented hum of a happy family life. As the years unfolded, Jason's career as predicted took off with meteoric speed. He was brilliant, driven, and possessed an easy charisma that opened doors. With each promotion, each new success came longer hours, increased travel, and a subtle but undeniable shift in our dynamic. I, in turn, made a conscious and, at the time, entirely willing decision to step back from my own demanding design career. When our son Noah arrived, a bright, inquisitive boy who became the absolute center of my universe, it felt like the most natural, most loving choice to dedicate myself fully to raising him, to creating that stable, nurturing home environment I had always envisioned, especially since Jason's work often kept him away or preoccupied. So I became the primary architect of our domestic life. My days were a carefully orchestrated symphony of unseen labor. I rose before dawn to prepare a hot breakfast for Jason before he rushed off to catch his commuter train and a healthy, fun lunch for Noah to take to school. Once they were out the door, my real workday began, the endless cycle of cleaning laundry, grocery shopping, bill paying school, volunteering, ferrying Noah to and from soccer practice and piano lessons. Then came the preparation of dinner, ensuring a nutritious home-cooked meal was on the table when Jason finally returned. Often late, often tired, often more interested in unwinding in front of the television than in engaging in meaningful conversation. I didn't mind it, not at first, not for a long time. I genuinely believed this was my contribution, my duty, my expression of love. I found a quiet satisfaction in a well-run home, in a happy, well-adjusted child, in knowing I was providing the stable foundation upon which Jason could build his impressive career. But it wasn't just the relentless, often monotonous physical labor of housework that eventually began to wear me down. It was the pervasive, soul-crushing fact that Jason, and by extension his entire family, never truly saw it. Or if they saw it, they certainly never acknowledged it, never valued it, never offered a word of genuine appreciation beyond those perfunctory, almost reflexive, "thanks for dinner" comments. My efforts, my sacrifices, my constant behind the scenes orchestration of their comfort and convenience became not just expected, but entirely invisible, taken as much for granted as the air they breathed. Jason's mother, Brenda Vance, was a woman cast in a formidable old school matriarchal mold. She was impeccably dressed, fiercely opinionated, and possessed an unshakable belief in her own inherent superiority and the divine right of her son to be catered to. From the moment I married Jason, I was in her eyes not so much a daughter-in-law to be welcomed and cherished, but a domestic utility, a necessary appendage to her son's life, whose primary function was to ensure his comfort and well-being, thus freeing him to achieve the greatness she had always envisioned for him. Her visits to our home, which became more frequent as her own social life dwindled, were less social calls and more like regal inspections. She would glide through my meticulously cleaned house, her eyes sharp as a hawk's, missing nothing, offering thinly veiled criticisms disguised as helpful suggestions. "Oh, Eleanor, dear, these curtains are looking a trifle tired, aren't they? Perhaps something in a more substantial fabric, or your roses are lovely, of course, but Millicent down the street, her blooms are simply divine this year. She has a new gardener, you know." There was always an implied comparison, a subtle reminder that in her eyes I never quite measured up. She never, not once, offered to help with meal preparation or cleanup during her extended stays, instead regaling us with lengthy monologues about her bridge club triumphs or the perceived failings of her other acquaintances, all while I bustled around her refilling her teacup, fetching her reading glasses, a silent, deferential attendant. Jason's two younger sisters, Chloe and Olivia, were in their own ways equally exasperating, if less overtly critical than their mother. Chloe, the elder of the two, was a whirlwind of self-absorbed drama, perpetually recounting her latest romantic entanglements or career crises, expecting a captive and sympathetic audience, which I, of course, was expected to provide, along with an endless supply of coffee and snacks. Olivia, younger and quieter, was no less entitled, treating our home like a comfortable service-included weekend retreat. They would arrive often unannounced, deposit their luggage in the guest room, and then proceed to lounge on the sofa, flicking through magazines or scrolling endlessly on their phones, while I cooked, cleaned, and catered to their every whim. They never offered to lift a finger, never asked if I needed assistance, simply accepted my servitude as their due, a natural extension of my role as Jason's wife, their brother's keeper. "Oh, Ellie, you make the best lasagna. You simply must make it again next time we visit," Chloe would exclaim as I cleared away her empty plate without a hint of irony or a word of thanks. The family traditions, as Brenda liked to call them, were another source of mounting resentment. All major holidays, Easter, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and most significant family birthdays were by unspoken but rigidly enforced decree to be celebrated at our house. It was Brenda would proclaim with a magnanimous air, "So much easier for everyone to gather at Jason and Ellie's," conveniently ignoring the fact that everyone did not include the one person who bore the entire burden of these mammoth undertakings, me. These gatherings were not joyous celebrations for me. They were grueling multi-day marathons of planning, shopping, cleaning, cooking, serving, and then, long after the last guest had departed, leaving a trail of happy, satiated destruction in their wake, the monumental task of cleaning up all single-handedly. Jason, bless his oblivious heart, would usually supervise by watching football with his father and brothers-in-law, occasionally wandering into the kitchen to snag a pre-dinner appetizer, or to ask with genuine bewilderment why I seemed a bit stressed. At first, as I said, I didn't mind, or rather, I convinced myself I didn't mind. I genuinely believed that this was just what a good wife, a good daughter-in-law, a good mother did. This was the price of a happy, harmonious family life. But over the slow, relentless passage of years, as Noah grew from a toddler into a school-aged boy, as Jason's career pressures mounted and his emotional distance from me widened, as the expectations of his family became more entrenched and my own needs more consistently ignored, a quiet, insidious resentment began to build within me, a slow-burning anger that I mostly kept tamped down, hidden even from myself. There were countless moments of quiet, solitary despair, the exhaustion that settled into my bones after a 16-hour day of domestic labor, only to be met with Jason's casual, "Anything interesting happened today, hun?" as he scrolled through his emails. The sting of overhearing Brenda tell a visiting cousin, "Eleanor is such a treasure, isn't she? So wonderfully domestic. Jason is a lucky man to have someone so accommodating." Accommodating. Not capable, not intelligent, not loving. Just accommodating, like a comfortable old armchair. The frustration of trying to have a serious conversation with Jason about the unequal division of labor only to be met with his genuinely perplexed, "But Ellie, you're so much better at all this stuff than I am. And you're home all day, what else is there to do?" His words, though perhaps not intentionally cruel, revealed a profound, almost willful blindness to the sheer volume and emotional weight of the invisible work that kept our lives and his running so smoothly. I found myself increasingly lonely, isolated within the four walls of my own beautifully kept yet emotionally barren home. There was no one to truly see me to acknowledge the relentless effort, the constant self-sacrifice. There were nights I would cry silently into my pillow, overwhelmed by a fatigue that was as much emotional as it was physical, by a gnawing sense of being taken for granted, of being slowly, inexorably erased. I started to look at my old design portfolios gathering dust in the attic with a poignant ache of regret for the career I had so willingly, so naively set aside. I began to compare my life, my constrained existence, with those of my old college friends, women who had pursued their professional dreams, who had partners who saw them as equals, who shared the burdens and joys of family life in a more equitable way. Was this it? Was this all my life was meant to be, a supporting role in someone else's story? My love for Noah, my bright, wonderful son, was the unwavering anchor in this sea of growing disillusionment. His laughter, his hugs, his innocent, unconditional love were the fuel that kept me going. But even there, a new troubling anxiety began to take root. I started to see with a chilling clarity how he was absorbing the family dynamics. He was seeing his mother always serving, always deferring, always putting everyone else's needs before her own. He was seeing his father, his grandmother, his aunts, treating me with a casual, unthinking dismissiveness. What lessons was he learning about the role of women, about the value of a mother's labor, about respect and partnership? I feared he would grow up to emulate Jason's well-meaning but ultimately damaging obliviousness, or worse, the entitled arrogance of his grandmother and aunts. That fear, more than anything else, began to chip away at my ingrained habit of silent endurance. It wasn't until that fateful Thanksgiving, our family's largest, most sacrosanct, and for me, most dreaded annual holiday, that I finally irrevocably reached my breaking point. The preparations, as always, had begun weeks in advance. Jason's entire extended family, his parents, both his sisters and their respective husbands and children, a visiting great aunt, and a few assorted family friends who Brenda always insisted on including, were as usual descending upon our home. The sheer volume of work was staggering. I was solely responsible for the menu planning for nearly 20 people, the marathon grocery shopping trips, the deep cleaning of every nook and cranny of our house, the elaborate seasonal decorations, and of course the Herculean task of cooking a multi-course Thanksgiving feast fit for royalty, or at least for the notoriously critical palate of Brenda Vance. Jason, bless his heart, had contributed by approving my meticulously drafted grocery list and handing me his credit card. His offer to help out on the day if he wasn't too caught up watching the football game was, I knew from long experience, an empty platitude. The days leading up to Thanksgiving were a blur of frantic activity. I single-handedly wrestled a 20-pound turkey into the brine, baked 3 different kinds of pie, from scratch peeled what felt like a mountain of potatoes, chopped endless vegetables, polished the good silver, laundered the guest linens, and arranged festive centerpieces, all while still managing Noah's school schedule and our usual household chores. I was running on fumes fueled by caffeine and a grim, resentful determination. The night before Thanksgiving, I was up until well past 2 a.m., basting the turkey, prepping the stuffing, setting the enormous dining table with our best china, ensuring every detail was perfect, every potential criticism from Brenda preempted. The exhaustion was a leaden weight in my limbs, a dull ache behind my eyes. I remember looking at my reflection in the darkened kitchen window. A tired, harried woman with flour smudged on her cheek and a haunted look in her eyes, and wondering with a sudden piercing clarity when I had lost myself, when I had allowed myself to become this unpaid, unthanked, and utterly depleted domestic martyr. Thanksgiving morning dawned gray and drizzly, mirroring my own internal state. I was up before sunrise, the familiar scent of roasting turkey soon filling the house, a scent that for me was now irrevocably intertwined with stress and servitude rather than joyous anticipation. Jason and Noah eventually wandered downstairs, drawn by the aromas offering sleepy, happy Thanksgivings. Before Jason settled onto the sofa with the newspaper and Noah, after a quick bowl of cereal, retreated to his room with his video games, I was alone as always in the bustling, chaotic heart of the storm, the kitchen. The guests. Jason's family began to arrive in a steady stream from mid-morning, a cacophony of loud greetings, rustling coats, and immediate unspoken expectations. Not a single one of them offered to lend a hand in the kitchen. Not a single one asked if I needed help. They congregated in the living room, their voices rising in cheerful, oblivious chatter, the television blaring the pre-game football commentary, while I, a solitary, increasingly frantic figure, juggled multiple simmering pots, monitored oven temperatures, and tried to orchestrate the complex ballet of getting more than a dozen different dishes to a state of perfection simultaneously. The demands, though, often couched in polite, almost casual tones, were relentless. "Ellie, dear, could you fetch me another glass of iced tea? Not too sweet now. Aunt Ellie, where are the cheese and crackers? The kids are starving. Eleanor, that lovely cranberry relish you make, is it ready yet? My Harold simply adores it." Each request, each interruption chipped away at my rapidly dwindling reserves of patience and energy. I felt like a highly stressed, unpaid, short-order cook and waitress in my own home. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of culinary acrobatics, the moment arrived. With a deep, steadying breath, I carefully maneuvered the enormous golden brown, perfectly roasted turkey out of the oven, its fragrant steam filling the already overheated kitchen. My back ached, my feet throbbed, sweat trickled down my temples, but I managed a weak, tremulous smile as I carried the magnificent bird, the triumphant centerpiece of the feast, into the dining room. A chorus of appreciative oohs and ahs greeted its arrival, quickly followed by the clatter of cutlery as everyone settled expectantly around the beautifully laid table. As I began the laborious process of carving the turkey, of then serving each individual plate with a carefully portioned array of side dishes, the creamy mashed potatoes, the savory stuffing, the glazed sweet potatoes, the green bean casserole, the homemade gravy, the aforementioned cranberry relish, Jason's mother Brenda, seated at the opposite end of the table like a benevolent queen surveying her domain, beamed at me with what appeared to be genuine if somewhat patronizing approval. "Oh, Eleanor, sweetheart," she declared, her voice carrying clearly above the general hubbub, ensuring everyone could hear her magnanimous praise. "You truly are such a good girl, such a marvel in the kitchen. You really do take care of absolutely everything, don't you? So effortlessly. We simply don't know what this family would do without you to, lo lu hethanay, take care of everything like this." She even added the Vietnamese phrase, a little linguistic flourish she sometimes used. I suspected to subtly emphasize my otherness, my role as the diligent, accommodating daughter-in-law. Her words, though undoubtedly intended as a compliment, a public acknowledgement of my efforts, landed on my exhausted, overwrought psyche, like a ton of bricks, like a final, crushing confirmation of my servitude. It wasn't the lack of help that finally broke me. It was the utter, blissful, deeply ingrained invisibility of my labor in their eyes. It wasn't seen as work, as effort, as sacrifice. It was just what Ellie did, effortlessly, like breathing. My years of tireless dedication, my constant striving for perfection, my silent swallowing of my own needs and desires had all been reduced to the convenient, taken-for-granted functioning of a well-oiled domestic appliance. I managed a tight, brittle smile, murmuring a polite, "You're too kind, Brenda." But inside, something cold and hard and irrevocably broken snapped. The carefully constructed dam of my resentment built up over years of silent endurance finally burst. I looked around the table at the sea of happy, oblivious, expectant faces, all eagerly awaiting their perfectly served plates. I looked at Jason, my husband, chatting animatedly with his brother-in-law, completely oblivious to the storm raging within me, to the fact that his wife was on the verge of shattering into a million pieces. And in that moment, a new, terrifyingly calm and utterly unshakable resolve took root in the desolate landscape of my heart. I finished serving the meal, moving like an automaton, my smile fixed, my movements precise. But with every scoop of potatoes, with every slice of turkey, a silent vow was being forged in the crucible of my despair. Never again. Later that night, long after the last guest had finally departed, leaving behind a mountain of dirty dishes, greasy pans, and a house that looked like a festive bomb had exploded within it, I stood alone in the silent, chaotic kitchen. Jason and Noah were fast asleep upstairs, oblivious. The cleanup, as always, was mine alone. As I scrubbed at a particularly stubborn gravy stain on the tablecloth, the tears finally came hot, silent, and utterly desolate. I sank onto a kitchen chair, burying my face in my hands, and wept for my lost self, for my unacknowledged labor, for the profound loneliness of my marriage, for the years I had allowed myself to be so thoroughly, so completely erased. But as the first pale rays of dawn began to creep through the kitchen window, illuminating the remnants of the Thanksgiving carnage, my tears began to subside, replaced by a strange, almost unnerving sense of clarity. The despair was still there, a dull ache deep in my soul. But now it was overlaid with something new, a cold, hard, and unyielding determination. I would not break. I would not scream. I would not engage in futile, emotionally draining arguments. Instead, I would change the rules of the game. I would quite simply stop playing my assigned role. My silent one-woman strike was about to begin, and no one, least of all the complacent Vance family, would see it coming. The morning after that soul-crushing Thanksgiving, I woke with a peculiar sense of lightness, of a heavy burden having been, if not entirely lifted, then at least identified and acknowledged by my own conscious mind. The emotional hangover from the previous day's Herculean efforts and subsequent breakdown was still palpable, a dull ache behind my eyes, a weariness that seeped into my bones. But overlaying it was a new, almost exhilarating sense of clarity of purpose. The decision I had made in the pre-dawn darkness of my chaotic kitchen felt not just right, but liberatingly, terrifyingly inevitable. I didn't need to be the one to do everything for everyone all the time, without respite, without acknowledgement. I needed to reclaim my life, my time, my very sense of self. And that meant first and foremost standing up for myself, drawing a line in the sand, not with anger or histrionics, but with a quiet, unshakable, and utterly non-negotiable resolve. I waited until that evening after Noah was in bed and Jason was settled in his armchair, engrossed in a post-Thanksgiving football game, the remnants of leftover turkey sandwiches still on a plate. Beside him, a plate I had by force of long habit cleared from the table and washed. I took a deep breath, walked into the living room, and calmly, deliberately switched off the television. Jason looked up, startled, a forkful of pie halfway to his mouth. "Hey, what gives, Ellie?" The game was in the final quarter. "Jason," I said, my voice even devoid of accusation but firm. "We need to talk. Seriously." He sighed, a put-upon sound that usually signaled his disengagement. "Can it wait, hon? I'm kind of beat." "No, Jason," I replied, meeting his gaze directly. "It can't wait. This is important. This is about us, about our family, about me." Reluctantly, he muted the television, which I had switched back on for him, a small, almost unconscious act of my old servitude. I immediately regretted and turned to face me, a flicker of wary curiosity, perhaps even annoyance in his eyes. "Okay," he said, his tone still tinged with impatience. "What's up? You've been a bit quiet today. I'm more than quiet, Jason. I began choosing my words carefully. I'm exhausted. Not just physically from yesterday, though. God knows that was a marathon. I'm emotionally exhausted. I'm tired of being the default organizer, cook cleaner, and general dog's body for every single family gathering, every holiday, every weekend visit from your mother and sisters. He frowned, genuinely perplexed. But you've always done it, Ellie, and you're so good at it. Everyone says so. Mom was just saying yesterday how amazing you are, how you handle everything so effortlessly. His words meant I supposed to be a compliment. A reiteration of his mother's misguided praise only served to fuel my resolve. That's precisely the problem, Jason. I said, my voice still calm, but with an undercurrent of steel he rarely heard. I have always done it. And because I've done it, and perhaps because I've tried to do it well without complaint, everyone, including you, has come to expect it to take it entirely for granted. It's not seen as a massive contribution, a significant labor of love and effort. It's just what Ellie does. And the effortlessly part, that's a carefully constructed illusion. Jason, an illusion I can no longer maintain, an illusion I will no longer perpetuate. I then proceeded calmly and methodically to detail the sheer volume of work involved in hosting Thanksgiving, from the weeks of planning and shopping to the 16-hour marathon of cooking and cleaning on the day itself and the solitary, thankless cleanup that followed. I described the subtle but persistent undermining I felt from his mother, the casual entitlement of his sisters, his own well-meaning but ultimately unhelpful obliviousness. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply stated the facts, the emotional toll it had taken on me over the years. Jason listened, his initial defensiveness slowly, almost imperceptibly, giving way to a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. He had never, I realized, truly considered the sheer scale of my domestic labor, especially around holidays. He saw the end result, the beautiful table, the delicious food, the smoothly running household, but he had remained blissfully, willfully ignorant of the immense, often invisible effort that produced it. I guess I never really thought about it that way, Ellie, he said, finally, his voice subdued. I always assumed you enjoyed doing it. You never said anything. Perhaps I should have, Jason, I conceded. Perhaps I should have spoken up years ago. That's my failing. But I'm speaking up now. And what I'm saying is this: I am no longer going to be the sole organizer, cook, and cleaner for every Vance family gathering held in this house. The upcoming Christmas celebration, which, as you know, your mother has already unilaterally decided will be here, will be different. Drastically different. He looked genuinely alarmed now. Different? How different? What do you mean you're not going to cook Christmas dinner? But it's a family tradition. Mom will have a fit. The girls will be, well, they won't understand. Then perhaps it's time they did understand, Jason, I said, my voice unwavering. Perhaps it's time for a new tradition, one that involves shared responsibility or at the very least a significant reduction in my soul burden. I need a break, Jason, a real break. I've been doing this almost single-handedly for nearly 20 years, and I'm tired. Bone tired, soul tired. So for this Christmas and for all future family gatherings hosted here, things are going to change. I will not be in the kitchen all day. I will not be serving everyone hand and foot. I will be enjoying the holiday with my son, with my husband, just like everyone else. Jason was clearly taken aback, struggling to process this sudden radical shift in the established domestic order. He tried to argue, to reason, to persuade. But Ellie, it's Christmas. It's the biggest holiday of the year. We can't just not have a proper Christmas dinner. What will people eat? What will Mom say? We can have a potluck, Jason, I suggested calmly. Everyone can bring a dish, or we can order catering. Or novel idea, your mother and sisters, who are all perfectly capable adults, can actually step into the kitchen and contribute. As for what your mother will say, frankly, Jason, at this point, I'm less concerned with her pronouncements and more concerned with my own sanity and well-being. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact. I am done being the default unpaid and unappreciated full-time caterer and event manager for the entire Vance clan. The conversation continued for some time with Jason attempting various forms of persuasion from gentle coaxing to frustrated exasperation. But I stood my ground, my resolve unshakable. I could see that he was just starting to realize the depth of my exhaustion, the seriousness of my intent. He didn't fully understand it yet, not really. He couldn't truly comprehend the years of accumulated resentment, the profound sense of being invisible that had led me to this point. But he saw something in my eyes, in the quiet finality of my tone, that told him this was different. This wasn't a fleeting mood or a temporary frustration. This was a fundamental shift. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, I didn't just make pronouncements. I began to subtly but consistently alter my behavior. I didn't entirely abdicate my household responsibilities. Noah still needed his meals, the house still needed basic cleaning. But I stopped doing all the little extra things I had always done, the things that went unnoticed but contributed to the smooth running of everyone else's lives. I no longer automatically laid out Jason's clothes for work in the morning. I didn't remind him of his appointments or pick up his dry cleaning unless he specifically asked, and even then I might suggest he handle it himself. I started carving out small pockets of time for myself, something I hadn't done in years. I'd take long, solitary walks with Buster. I'd curl up with a book for an hour in the afternoon. I even reconnected with an old college friend for a leisurely lunch, something that would have been unthinkable just a few months prior. Jason, to his credit though, clearly bewildered by these changes, didn't actively resist them. He started slowly and somewhat awkwardly at first to pick up some of the slack. He learned how to operate the washing machine. He occasionally, with much fumbling, made Noah's school lunch. They weren't monumental shifts, but they were a start. He did, as I expected, relay my Christmas ultimatum to his mother and sisters. Their initial reaction, as reported back to me by a somewhat stressed Jason, was a predictable mixture of disbelief, indignation, and outright derision. "Eleanor thinks you're just being dramatic, that you'll come around when Christmas actually gets here," Jason told me, an anxious frown creasing his brow. "Chloe said you're probably just looking for more attention, and Olivia just laughed and said, 'Good luck with that. Jason Ellie always caves.'" Their dismissive arrogance, their utter inability to comprehend my position, only served to solidify my resolve. Let them think what they wanted. They were in for a rude awakening. As Christmas Day approached and I made no moves to begin the usual marathon of holiday preparations, no frantic grocery shopping, no obsessive menu planning, no elaborate decoration scheme, a subtle, almost imperceptible sense of unease began to permeate Jason's increasingly frequent phone calls with his mother. The question, unspoken but hanging heavy in the air, was clear. If Ellie wasn't going to do it, who on earth would? The stage was set for a Christmas confrontation unlike any the Vance family had ever experienced. The morning of Christmas Eve arrived with a light, festive dusting of snow on the ground, but within the Vance household, the atmosphere was anything but tranquil. The usual comforting aromas of cinnamon cloves and roasting meats that typically heralded the approaching holiday were conspicuously absent. Instead, there was a strange, almost unnerving quiet emanating from the kitchen. I, Eleanor Vance, the traditional orchestrator of all things Christmas, was not, as was my custom for the past 2 decades, a whirlwind of flour-dusted aprons, clattering pans, and meticulously timed culinary endeavors. Instead, I was curled up in my favorite armchair by the fireplace, a steaming mug of herbal tea in hand, engrossed in a captivating new novel I'd been longing to read for months. Noah was beside me, happily assembling a complex Lego spaceship, occasionally asking for my admiration of his progress. It was for me an unprecedented, almost surreal level of Christmas Eve calm. Jason, on the other hand, was a bundle of nervous energy. He paced the living room repeatedly, checking his phone, his brow furrowed with an anxiety he was clearly struggling to conceal. He had, at my calm but firm insistence, informed his mother and sisters several weeks prior that this year's Christmas gathering would be a simplified potluck-style affair and that my contribution would be limited to providing the venue and perhaps 1 or 2 very simple side dishes. The response from Brenda, as relayed by a stressed Jason, had been a frosty silence followed by a curt, Well, if that's how Eleanor chooses to host her family, I suppose we'll just have to make the best of it. Don't expect any miracles, Jason. Chloe and Olivia had apparently expressed a mixture of disbelief and thinly veiled amusement, clearly not taking my declaration seriously. As the afternoon wore on and the arrival of the Vance clan loomed, Jason's agitation grew. Ellie, are you sure about this? He asked for what felt like the 100th time, his voice tight with apprehension. Mom called again. She sounded ominous. She asked what time the grand feast was scheduled with a very sarcastic emphasis on grand. I smiled serenely, turning a page in my book. Jason, my love, I am perfectly sure. As I told you, I've ordered a pre-cooked organic turkey from that lovely little deli downtown which you can pick up later. I've made a large bowl of simple green salad and there's a very nice cranberry sauce in the fridge. The rest, as they say, is up to them. Or up to you if you feel so inclined. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. But what if they don't bring anything? What if it's a disaster? Mom will never let me hear the end of it. Then I said, my voice still calm, we shall have a very simple, very quiet Christmas dinner of turkey and salad. And your mother's pronouncements, Jason, are for once not my primary concern. The arrival of the Vance family later that afternoon was as predicted an event. Brenda swept in first, her gaze immediately critically scanning the living room, no doubt noting the lack of elaborate floral arrangements and the distinctly unfestive aroma emanating from the kitchen, or rather the lack thereof. Chloe and Olivia followed in her wake, laden not with casserole dishes or platters of food, but with armfuls of brightly wrapped presents and an air of expectant entitlement. Eleanor, dear! Brenda exclaimed, her voice a little too bright, a little too loud. Merry Christmas! The house looks cozy. The unspoken addendum, and decidedly underdecorated and suspiciously unsmelling of a 20-course meal, hung heavy in the air. Merry Christmas, Brenda girls, I replied, rising from my armchair with a genuine relaxed smile. So glad you could make it. Please make yourselves comfortable. Can I offer anyone? Well, actually, Jason can show you where the drinks are. Help yourselves. The initial bewilderment on their faces was a study in controlled shock. They exchanged confused, almost alarmed glances. Chloe, ever the more direct of the two sisters, finally blurted out, But, Ellie, where's all the food? The appetizers. You always have those amazing little sausage rolls. Ah, yes, I said, my smile unwavering. As Jason mentioned, we're doing things a little differently this year. More relaxed. It's a potluck. I trust everyone brought their assigned dish. A stunned, awkward silence descended. It became abundantly painfully clear that none of them had taken my potluck suggestion seriously. They had arrived empty-handed, fully expecting the usual Ellie-produced Christmas miracle to materialize. Brenda was the first to recover her expression, hardening. Eleanor. She said, her voice dripping with icy disapproval. I believe there has been a misunderstanding. Jason mentioned something about a simplified Christmas, but surely you didn't expect us to bring the Christmas dinner to your home. Not the entire dinner, Brenda. No, I replied, my tone still light, almost conversational. Just a dish or two to share. As I said, I've arranged for the turkey and a salad. But if no one else has brought anything, well, I suppose it will be a rather Spartan, albeit healthy Christmas feast. The color rose in Brenda's cheeks. Olivia looked horrified. Chloe actually pouted. Jason, standing awkwardly by the fireplace, looked as though he wished the earth would swallow him whole. But what are we supposed to eat? Olivia wailed, her voice tinged with genuine panic. Well, I said, gesturing towards the kitchen with a cheerful wave of my hand, the pantry is reasonably well stocked. The fridge has plenty of basic ingredients. I'm sure between all of you incredibly capable women, you can whip up a few delightful side dishes in no time. The oven is free, the stovetop is clear. Please feel free to make yourselves at home. In my kitchen. For a long, stunned moment, no one moved. They just stared at me, then at each other, as if I had suddenly sprouted a second head. The sheer, unadulterated shock on their faces was almost comical had the situation not been so deeply rooted in years of my own silent frustration. Then slowly, reluctantly, with much sighing, muttering, and exchanged glares of disbelief directed primarily at a mortified Jason the Great Vance family Christmas culinary experiment began. Brenda, who hadn't cooked a holiday meal in over 30 years, looked utterly bewildered when faced with a raw potato and a peeler. Chloe, after a disastrous attempt to make a simple gravy that resulted in a lumpy, floury mess, declared herself utterly useless in a kitchen without a recipe book and a sous chef. Olivia managed to burn the store-bought dinner rolls. Jason, bless his now thoroughly stressed soul, did try to help manfully, attempting to mash potatoes with a fork and nearly setting off the smoke alarm while trying to sauté some onions. I watched, not with smugness, but with a quiet, detached fascination as they fumbled, argued, and eventually, through sheer desperate necessity, managed to produce a rather motley, somewhat chaotic, and decidedly ungourmet collection of side dishes. And me, Eleanor Vance, for the first time in 2 decades of Christmas celebrations, actually enjoyed Christmas Eve. I sat by the fire sipping a glass of wine, chatting happily with Noah about his Lego masterpiece. I listened to Christmas carols. I even, to Jason's utter astonishment, took a leisurely nap on the sofa for a good hour. I did not set foot in the kitchen except to retrieve another glass of wine. I did not offer a single piece of unsolicited advice. I did not lift a finger to rescue their culinary endeavors. I simply was present, relaxed, and for the first time in a very, very long time, genuinely at peace on a holiday. The Christmas dinner itself, when it was finally haphazardly assembled on the table hours later than usual, was memorable. The turkey, which Jason had managed to pick up and reheat, albeit slightly dry on one side, was edible. The salad was fresh. The side dishes were a testament to their collective inexperience. Slightly undercooked carrots, overly salted green beans, the aforementioned lumpy gravy, and burnt rolls. But they ate it. They ate it all. And as they did, a strange, almost grudging silence fell over the table. A silence punctuated only by the clinking of cutlery and the occasional weary sigh from Brenda. The usual boisterous entitled chatter was conspicuously absent. The true reckoning, however, came not during the meal, but in its aftermath. As the last of the somewhat disappointing pumpkin pie was consumed, a new unspoken expectation hung in the air. Who was going to clear the table? Who was going to face the mountain of dirty dishes, the greasy roasting pan, the sticky countertops? All eyes almost instinctively turned to me. I smiled a sweet, serene, utterly unhelpful smile. What a lovely, if somewhat rustic meal, I commented cheerfully. I'm feeling rather full. I think I'll just go and sit by the fire with my book. Noah, darling, would you like to join me? The expressions on their faces, Brenda's, Chloe's, Olivia's, were a priceless kaleidoscope of shock, indignation, and dawning, horrified comprehension. This wasn't just about the cooking anymore. This was about the entire burden. Jason, to his credit, seemed to finally truly grasp the enormity of the situation, the depth of my resolve. He looked at me, then at his mother and sisters, then at the disaster zone that was our dining room and kitchen. He sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to come from his very soul. "All right, Mom, girls," he said, his voice quiet but firm, a new note of authority in it that I hadn't heard before when addressing his family. "Looks like it's our turn. Ellie's had enough Christmases in the kitchen to last a lifetime. Let's figure out how this dishwasher works, shall we?" And so for the first time in the history of Vance family gatherings at my home, the post-meal cleanup was not my solitary thankless task. It was a chaotic, inefficient, and often comical group effort undertaken by a bewildered matriarch and her 2 equally inept daughters, grudgingly supervised by a son and brother who was finally painfully beginning to understand. The day after that revolutionary Christmas, a Christmas that would forever be etched in Vance family lore as the year Ellie didn't cook. Jason approached me, his demeanor a mixture of sheepishness, exhaustion, and a newfound almost tender respect. We were sitting in the quiet living room, the remnants of the holiday. A few stray pine needles, a forgotten gift bow, the only evidence of the previous day's upheaval. Noah was happily engrossed with his new Christmas toys in his room. Ellie, he began, his voice subdued, his gaze earnest, as he sat beside me on the sofa. I need to apologize. For yesterday. For a lot of yesterdays, I guess. For years, actually. I looked at him waiting, saying nothing, allowing him the space to find his words. I had no idea, Ellie. No real idea how much you were doing, how much you were carrying, not just on holidays, but every single day. I saw you busy, of course, but I just assumed it was what you did, what you liked to do. I never stopped to think about the sheer volume of it, the relentless nature of it, the toll it must have been taking on you. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of genuine remorse. Yesterday, watching Mom and Chloe and Olivia try to navigate the kitchen, it was a disaster, a comedy of errors, and that was just one meal. You've been doing that and so much more for us, for them, for years, without a word of complaint, and certainly without any real help from me or from them. He paused, his eyes searching mine. I am so sorry, Ellie, for being so, oblivious, for being so selfish, for not seeing you, not truly appreciating you, for letting my mother and sisters treat you like an unpaid servant. I should have stood up for you years ago. I should have been a better partner, a better husband. I just took it all for granted, and I am deeply, profoundly ashamed of that. His apology, unlike any he had ever offered before, felt utterly, achingly sincere. It wasn't a quick, dismissive sorry designed to smooth things over. It was a genuine acknowledgement of his failings, a testament to the profound impact the previous day's events had had on his perception. It was a small step, yes, but it was a monumental step in the right direction. "Thank you, Jason," I said softly, my own voice thick with an emotion I hadn't expected. Not triumph, but a tender, fragile hope. That means a lot to me, more than you know. In the weeks and months that followed, things began to change slowly but undeniably. Jason, true to his newfound understanding, started to take on a far more active, equitable role in our household. He learned how to cook a few simple meals. He started doing his own laundry and Noah's. He actually voluntarily cleaned the bathrooms. He began to actively shield me from the more unreasonable demands of his mother and sisters, often intercepting their calls politely but firmly, managing their expectations for future visits. It wasn't always perfect. Old habits die hard. But the effort, the genuine intention was there. Our home began to feel less like my sole responsibility and more like a shared partnership. The change in Brenda, Chloe, and Olivia was predictably more gradual, more nuanced, and certainly more grudging. Brenda never offered a direct verbal apology for her years of dismissive behavior. That I knew was likely too much to expect from a woman of her generation and temperament. But her actions, or rather her inactions, spoke volumes. During subsequent, much less frequent visits, she became noticeably less demanding. She would on rare occasions even offer a compliment that felt almost genuine, or to Jason's utter astonishment clear her own plate from the table without being asked. Chloe and Olivia, too, seemed to have absorbed some of the lesson. They were still at heart rather self-centered, but their casual entitlement when visiting our home had significantly diminished. They started to bring hostess gifts. They occasionally, if somewhat awkwardly, offered to help with simple tasks. The dynamic had irrevocably shifted. They knew, with a certainty they hadn't possessed before, that the days of Ellie the silent, accommodating servant were well and truly over. And what of me, Eleanor Vance? I found a new lightness in my step, a new sense of freedom in my own home. With the crushing weight of their collective expectations lifted, I had more time, more energy for myself, for Noah, for my relationship with Jason, which to my surprise and delight began to rediscover some of its old forgotten warmth and intimacy. I re-enrolled in a few online interior design courses, reigniting a passion I had long thought dormant. I started volunteering at Noah's school library, not out of obligation, but because I genuinely enjoyed it. My self-confidence, eroded by years of being undervalued, began to blossom anew. I was no longer just Jason's wife, Noah's mother, Brenda's daughter-in-law. I was Ellie, and Ellie, I was discovering, was a woman of strength, of resilience, and of quiet, unshakable worth. I didn't need to fight for my worth with loud proclamations or dramatic confrontations anymore. I had proven it not just to them, but more importantly to myself through one simple revolutionary act. I had stopped. I had stopped being the person they expected me to be, and in doing so, I had forced them and myself to see the person I truly was, the person I was always meant to be. And while the journey had been undeniably difficult, profoundly painful at times, taking control of my own life, reclaiming my own narrative, felt undeniably wonderfully good. The silence that had once been filled with my unbao yuan de lao dong uncomplaining labor was now filled with the sound of my own, choosing the quiet hum of a life lived on my own terms. My revenge, if one could even call it that, was not a bitter vindictive act. It was the quiet, powerful, and ultimately transformative act of reclaiming my own value, my own time, my own life. It was in the dawning respect in my husband's eyes, in the grudging, then growing consideration from my in-laws, in the confident, happy smile of my son, who now saw his mother not as a harried servant, but as a strong, contented woman. The most important lesson, the one I hoped Noah would carry with him, was not about winning a battle or proving a point. It was about the profound importance of self-respect, of recognizing your own worth, and of having the courage to draw boundaries even with those you love, especially when those boundaries are essential for your own well-being. Standing up for yourself, I learned, isn't always easy, especially when you've spent a lifetime or what feels like it trying to please others to keep the peace, to be the good girl. But sometimes the most powerful, most revolutionary, most life-altering thing you can do is to simply quietly and unequivocally say, enough. When you take control of your own life, when you demand the respect you inherently deserve, you don't just change your own world. You often surprisingly change the world of those around you as well. It's never too late to demand respect. It's never too late to rewrite your own story.